Let's get comfortable. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning, and welcome to your panel, How Fearless Women Lead, Breaking Barriers and Driving Change in Canada. My name is Christine Leduc. I'm a registered professional forester all the way here from Timmins in northeastern Ontario. And yes, thanks. Thank you. And I'm VP Communications with the Sustainable Forestry Initiative and with Project Learning Tree Canada. We are a super proud sponsor of Eco Canada and Eco Impact 2024. And I just had to be on this panel. I think at one point the organizer sent me a list and asked me to choose 3, and I sent them back. This is the one, and you will soon find out why. Project Learning Tree Canada has a lot in common with Eco Canada because we work to advance environmental education, forest literacy, and career pathways. And one of my favorite programs, our Green Jobs program, has placed over 7,600 young adults in positions in the forest and conservation sector in all provinces. And my colleague Madri, who manages the program, is here with me today. And because forestry is so male-dominated, we are really proud to have achieved 50% women in our placements, among other successes. So we really want to see women in the workforce, and we really want to see women in leadership positions, and that is what our panel is going to address today. And so I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I'm Amberly Dooley. I'm both a professional engineer and an environment professional, and I am currently the Director of Policy at the Pathways Alliance, which basically means I get to do policy advocacy and technology development across all of the aspects that affect the oil sands sector, from land and biodiversity to climate to water use and everything in between. So it's a fun job with lots of different aspects to it.
Good morning. I'm Naveen Peters. I have a consulting company called Peters & Associates. I work primarily with nonprofit organizations throughout Canada on fundraising, community engagement, leadership, board governance strategies, and also do philanthropic planning for some families across Canada. And my particular focus is how we are harnessing our community and philanthropic leadership to help advance social change and impact in the world around us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Blair Lancaster. I'm very happy to be here and super pumped to be on this panel with these 3 amazing women. I was, until a month ago, January 5th, 2024, I was Vice President of Commercial Development at a company called Tidewater Midstream, which is in the midstream sector of the oil and gas industry, which is gas processing, liquids upgrading, storage, transportation, marketing, all very sexy stuff. I did really love my job. The reason that I'm not in it right now is because we closed a deal at the end of December with another midstream company called AltaGas, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But I played a key role in the closing of that deal, and it was just agreed upon with my CEO that when I was hired at Tidewater, it was to help grow the company. And now in this case, we were selling off our major assets and selling off our growth project, and so just going in a different direction. So when the deal closed, I wrapped things up and had my last day, and I am now living the luxurious life of temporary retirement, and my husband emphasizes the word temporary daily, tells me not to get too used to it. I sit on the board of Winsport, which is Canada Olympic Park, as well as another organization called Canada Powered by Women, and I'm spending making up for a lot of lost time right now with my kids.
Thank you. The next question is really to get into your career pathways. So if you could explain to our audience, how did you get to this point, and what were some of the things that influenced you? Maybe we'll start with Blair this time.
So I sat on a similar panel a couple years ago, and a similar question was asked, and reference was made to the analogy of career progression being like a ladder, like very linear, and you start in one role and then you climb up a rung and you get to the next role and then the next, but all kind of within one functional area, versus a career progression that's more like a jungle gym, like way more random and doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. And for me, it's definitely more the latter. and I don't mean the climbing ladder, I mean opposite. It's more like the jungle gym. But anyway, so I just really quickly, I'm from Edmonton, and I graduated from the University of Alberta a long time ago. I did my Bachelor of Commerce. I majored in international business, and I planned to spend my career living and working all over the world for global companies. And I actually did start my career off that way a little bit. I worked at the Canadian Consulate in Boston for the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service for 6 years. Life events happen. I moved back to Alberta, in this case to Calgary. I worked at Calgary Economic Development for a couple of years as International Business Development Manager. My boss then left, started a private consulting company, which I joined him to do, business development, oil and gas space. And while I was there, I got connected with a bunch of people from a company called Ferris, got to know them, their culture, decided this is where I want to work, and I spent the next 10 years at Ferris building a small-scale liquefied natural gas business, starting in regulatory affairs, moving into government relations, external affairs, and business development. And then after Ferris, ended up at Tidewater. And I guess the point is, I've done a whole bunch of different things, all kind of externally focused. And the connection was just, you're in one role and just being open-minded, working really hard, building relationships, and every next role was directly related to somebody I had met or a project that I had worked on from the role before. And people ask all the time, what's your 5-year plan? And for me, I've never had one, I still don't have one. I just want to do what I love doing with people I love working with, period, and get paid.
Sounds like a great retirement plan.
I'm not there yet.
Not there. I more or less grew up in Saskatchewan and did an undergraduate degree at the U of S in international relations, and went to Switzerland to do international conflict resolution, and had the great fortune of doing a couple of internships at the UN in Switzerland and in New York before moving to Washington, D.C., where I was going to change the world. And like so many who end up in that area of the world, I started volunteering as I was waiting for my work permit at this great organization called the Tahirih Justice Center that helps women and girls fleeing human rights abuses and gender-based persecution. And all of my studiousness in Switzerland and the internship at the UN and these incredible opportunities could not have prepared me for the reality of what some of these women and girls have experienced. And so going from small town Saskatchewan to a maximum security prison in Baltimore to try to get a 16-year-old girl out of what was a full asylum and detention center because she had fled incredible human rights atrocities. And because I could speak French, I found myself often translating for women that were fleeing French-speaking countries, predominantly from Africa. And spent a few years with this organization, more on the public policy side, working on the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, helped pass a bill through Congress that put regulation on the mail-order bride industry, but eventually found my way into philanthropy and working with individuals, companies, organizations who can see the transformational power of change that a dedication and a commitment can have. And it's a great privilege to be in a role and to work with individuals who want to change the world around them. And that helped to set me on a career trajectory of what is the role that I can play to help balance, address, rectify, change the plight and the circumstances for those that are most vulnerable around us. And so that has never left the back of my mind, even being up here in Canada now and working with organizations from education to women, such as Access Connects and Board Ready Women, to educational institutions, to the Cancer Foundation. But it's all about how can we harness the power of philanthropy and community connection to address impact and change in the world around us.
All right, well, so following that, my story is a little bit simpler, and it starts in a small town in British Columbia. where I did science fair as a student. We'll talk later about philanthropy and science fair. But as a science fair student, I loved exploring different things, and I got told by a well-meaning, lovely elderly gentleman that it was too bad that I was a girl because I could never become an engineer, and clearly I would have an aptitude for it. Being, I think they call them, it's not stubborn anymore. Determined. Being a determined young woman, I immediately set forth to become an engineer. I had no intent to do so whatsoever before that, but it's what I'm doing now. So I went off. I had to pick between the U of A and UBC, and on the day I had to pick, it was -40 in Edmonton, so you know where I went. But yeah, I had the fortune of working in the mining sector in British Columbia in both hard rock and coal mines for a number of years. And then eventually my mom said, you know, you're never going to find a man in a small town in British Columbia. Fair. So I moved to Calgary. And I became a part of the oil and gas industry here in Calgary. I've had the fortune of working for a number of the companies that operate here in Calgary. And eventually, at one point, I came back from a maternity leave. They lovingly brought me back into the organization, but there wasn't a job for me. And seeing the writing on the wall, I quickly found a new job, and I moved to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And so I had the opportunity to work there for 7 or 8 years, doing advocacy on behalf of the oil and gas sector as a whole, which is a lot easier than doing it as a GR person for a specific company, because instead of going to the AER and saying, hi, I'm here from energy company X, and I'd like to talk about something, I could say, hypothetically, if an oil and gas company was considering, and they would talk to me about it. So it was a lot easier job when you work for an association than working for a specific company in that regard. And then eventually, the Pathways Alliance was formed about 2 years ago now, and they were looking to advocate on behalf of the 6 major oil sands players here in Alberta. And they happen to need a policy person. So here I am now as the policy person at the Pathways Alliance, and I have the opportunity to work with all sorts of really interesting and really involved and engaged people on the innovation side and in the regulation space, and working with governments and all sorts of other cool people that I get to meet along the way, who awe me with their incredible endeavors. So definitely pleased to be part of this panel and to have an opportunity to chat with you guys and share a little bit more about how you go from being a stubborn small child to a leader in the sector.
Well, now that we've set the stage, let's have a little audience interaction. And I apologize, maybe the podium is just too close to me. I feel like I have a blind spot. So we would like to collect some data about women in the workforce, starting with you, dear audience. Show of hands, who works on a team with other women? Okay. How many of you work on a team led by a woman? Nice. How many of you work for an organization that is led by a woman? Okay. How many of you work for an organization with a woman on the board of director? Okay. So we have a pretty progressive audience. So speaking of data, let's take a look at some of the stats. I already told you I'm from the forestry sector, so I'm kicking it off with some forestry stats. According to StatsCan in 2016, so this is old, women were only 17% of the Canadian forest products sector, but I don't have any information there in terms of where they are. And that was only an increase of 1.5% since 2001. So not a big increase between 2001 and 2016, and certainly hope that we've made more progress in the last 10 years. I feel like I'm no longer the only woman in the room. So I'd love to see some updated data. When we look at the professional foresters associations, which are the associations that regulate the practice of forestry, for those that make the data publicly available for women, we have 15% of professional foresters in Quebec who are women and 21% in BC. So again, some good data, but opportunity to see some improvement. And we did do a little bit of research. Over the last 9 years, the number of board seats held by women in publicly listed Canadian companies increased from 11% to 27%. And the number of companies with at least one woman on the executive team had increased from 60% to 71%. And then we see some differences from sector to sector. So in mining companies, for example, 50% of mining companies had one or more women in executive positions compared to 90% in the retail industry. And Amberly shared some other details for oil and gas from an Ulster report from 2022, which showed that oil and gas company had 22% of their companies that had women as directors, and 15% which had women as executives. So I think there's some data there that we want to keep tracking. We want better data. Amberly this morning was telling me, what are the age distribution of women in different positions. So let's get more data. Let's see if we're actually making some change. And we know, studies for a long time have shown that more women in leadership positions and more diversity leads to better company performance, including the financial performance. And so what I would like to ask our panelists as our next question is, what does leadership mean to you, and how do you define your leadership style? Who would like to start?
Sure, I'll start. I have to admit, when they asked me to be on this panel, I looked behind me to see who they were asking, because I was like, women in leadership, I don't know who they're talking to. But then it turns out I'm actually a female leader, and so I was really excited about that. Shocking. I think one of the things that females don't necessarily always do is recognize ourselves for how amazing we are, and recognize ourselves for our achievements. It's like, oh yeah, wait, I am a woman leader. I do have information I can share. I am kind of cool. And so I think, one of the things that defines my leadership style is probably a little bit of lack of awareness. But also, in working in an association environment, you end up working as sort of a leader for a group of people over which you have zero authority whatsoever at all. You are trying to convince a group of people to do work that they may or may not want to do, but that you need them to do in order to help the association be successful. And leading without any sort of authority or power or whatever you want to call it is a whole skill set that anyone can develop at any point in time, because you don't actually have to lead anyone to do so. You can just practice on everybody. And not that I practiced on everyone, but my kids may have been subject to a few tests. But I think the real thing is my leadership style is collaborative, because when you try to get a group of people who you don't have authority over to do something, you need to work with them and collaborate and bring them along to where you're trying to go to. And so for me, I think, aside from my lack of awareness, I think the real focus is on that collaborative piece of it, and making sure that when you have a group and you're trying to move in a direction, everyone understands where you're going and why you're trying to get there, as well as what their role is to help succeed as a collective, as a team, as an organization, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. I think to play on that principle of collaboration, and maybe that is something that women are more attuned to in terms of a reflection of their leadership style than their male counterparts. But I think as a result, it makes it challenging if you lead outside of the norms. If you are a decisive female leader, I think women often get stuck in that likability trap of being a strong, confident, vulnerable, assertive but not aggressive. Anyone can look at that monologue from the Barbie movie, and everybody's like, okay, right, I see, everybody, the head's nodding. That resonated with many people, and I think as a result, the expectations that we as employees or citizens have on our leaders are not achievable. And as a result, we need to lean into our strengths, acknowledge where we struggle, and seek to collaborate and seek to walk the walk and talk the talk and inspire others. But also note that leadership is hard, and female leadership is hard as well. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to take a step back. And to give yourself the grace and the patience to come into your own leadership. I think we often make a lot of assumptions around what leadership looks like and the type of leader that we ought to be. And when that doesn't come naturally, it comes off as being disingenuous or not authentic. And so I think everybody on their career journey can seek to bring to their own leadership style a sense of authenticity, but a sense of confidence in a way that resonates with you, because people can sense when you're not being genuine.
I love all of these comments. And I was just I'm gonna digress slightly, and I can come back to my leadership style if you want, and speak really quickly about it. But just in terms of having confidence and how hard it is to be a leader, and thinking about the title of this panel, which is How Fearless Women Lead, I would like to make the point that I am not a fearless woman. And I don't think that any successful woman or man, for that matter, is completely fearless. So I don't want to, sitting up here is scary. It's fun to do, but it's super uncomfortable and it's scary, and you never know how is this going to go, and am I going to get my thoughts out properly, and am I going to make a fool of myself? Starting a new career in a leadership role is very scary. And when I started at Tidewater, I was terrified. I had zero knowledge of the midstream sector of oil and gas, and I was hired into this VP role where I was going to be leading a team of 6, so nothing, not major, but still, and expectations were really high. And I just thought, I am a total fraud. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I really did feel that way. And everyone's gonna wonder who in the world hired this woman. And then I thought, okay, well actually, the man who hired me for a reason. It's because he had a gap, he got to know me, he knew I could fill the gap, and I thought, well, if he thinks I can do this job, then I probably can do this job. So it's kind of taking a bit of a leap of faith and having some confidence in that. And I kind of along those lines, and I think it's important, it's one of my life philosophies, but which is to put myself in at least one uncomfortable position every single day. Like this would qualify for that today, for sure. That used to be written on Lululemon bags, so I think it's fairly legit. Put yourself in but even in this room, sometime throughout this panel, if we don't talk the whole time, somebody might really want to stand up and ask a question, except the idea of standing up in front of, I don't know how many people are in here, is totally terrifying, and then the easy way out is not to do it. But my advice to you is just stand up and do it. A, what's the worst that can happen? B, you might actually learn something if you get a helpful response from one of us to your question. And then C, it's just that sense of pride. Like you stood up, you did it, and fear can really be a motivating, confidence building thing. So embrace it. I just want to throw that out there because it's a bit misleading. We're all fearful to some degree. That's a lot of talking.
You know, it's funny you said that. I was going to ask a question at the very end because I also looked at that title and thought, I'm not fearless, so maybe these ladies on stage can tell me what the secret is. But I think that that's very helpful and healthy for people to keep in mind.
Just one shot of tequila before. That's it.
But also what Blair said is we are looking for audience participation. We're having a discussion, and the 4 of us just met this morning, and so we're here with you. We're happy to see so many people in the room, and so at any point, if you're interested, we'd love to hear from you, and we will reserve some time at the end, but please don't hesitate. And so I'll give you some time to think about your question or your comment or what you'd like to share. And I'll go into the next question, which is, why do we think it's so important to have women in leadership roles? And Amberly, I'd like you to kick this one off.
Sure. There's a book called It's a Great Time to Be a Girl. And I'm going to get the name wrong. I'll figure it out. I'll let you know. Anyway, long story short, in that book, one of the things that really stuck with me was a description of how the workforce is changing. And one of the pieces, we heard about it this morning, and there's some other panels on AI and things that are disrupting our industry and all sorts of cool, needs for collaboration and innovation and working differently and thinking differently. And one of the perspectives that is shared in that book was that if you think of a standard kind of conventional old school workforce as being the orchestra, everybody has a part, they have strict lines they have to play, they follow the notes exactly, someone tells them what to do and how to do it. That worked. But it's not going to work anymore. And what we need now is the ability to be a jazz ensemble. We need to make it up as we go. We need to do a little riff over here. We need the ability to adapt and be flexible and change and not just follow the direction of the guy waving the stick at the front of the room. And I think the role that women leaders have is we do think differently and we do look at things differently. And if we don't have a diversity of leadership, including both men and women and different perspectives, we don't have that ability to be a jazz band because everyone's wearing a penguin suit and playing a conventional instrument. We need that ability to be different and to adapt. And part of that is having a diversity of people making up that ensemble or that perspective or that team. And so, I've learned not to do studies. Clearly, I can't remember anything for longer than 2 seconds. So I've learned not to cite numbers and studies, but I would go out on a limb and say there's hundreds of studies that have clearly demonstrated the business value of having women in leadership, the value and shareholder return of having women in leadership, as well as the value of attracting and retaining top talent. If you don't have a diversity of perspectives in the workforce, people don't want to work for you, and then they go into early retirement for a little while until they find a place they do want to work.
Oh my God, that's so true. I just skipped out on some of that.
See, so it's about having that diversity, and it's not saying that there needs to be all women in the workforce. That would also be really bad and sort of like an orchestra again. So it's having that diversity of opinion and perspective, and having leaders that demonstrate that from all of the different lenses that we have.
I was just gonna cite a very specific example, and it is about me, which is not showing a lot of humility, which is supposed to be a more female characteristic. But I do think it's relevant here. And I mentioned at the very beginning that I was a key part of this deal that Tidewater did with AltaGas. And so just to give a little bit of background, in order for that deal to close, and it was a $650 million deal, which for Tidewater was a very big deal and absolutely critical to the survival and future of Tidewater. Also a very additive, accretive deal for AltaGas and really added to their business model and their asset mix. So the stakes were high. In order for the deal to close, we had to get to a positive final investment decision on our major gas plant expansion project. So that means having the project sanctioned. And in order for the project to be sanctioned, we had to have 5, I don't think I'm supposed to say that number, it doesn't matter. We had to have various, they're called gas handling agreements. So they're the major, like 10-year contract signed with each of the producers that were signing on to the gas plant to flow their volumes through. We had 3 people on the Tidewater negotiating team. I was one of them. We had 3 people on the AltaGas negotiating team. So that's 6 of us there. We had so many of our counterparties at the various customer companies that we were doing these deals with. And then we had a bajillion lawyers who I actually did find to be very helpful. But my point is there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There were a lot of egos to manage. These agreements can be extremely complex. They're worth a lot of money. They're for a very long period of time. Negotiations definitely got contentious. As VP of Commercial Development at Tidewater, and it was Tidewater's project, I was essentially the lead on the negotiation team. We got the whole thing done in 4 months. It could have taken way longer. It could have completely fallen off the rails. And I really do believe, and it's been confirmed by a variety of people working on that deal, that it was the more traditional, and I don't mean only, but the more traditional female leadership characteristics that got it done as quickly as we did, which was relationship building, collaboration, inclusivity, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, what's the word, holistic approach to decision making, that I think played it. So I think that was a woman in a leadership role in a very specific example for a high stakes deal that I think might have turned out differently with somebody else leading it.
Very good. And we're sold. We believe it. And I think this next question is relevant, and also again to you, Blair, because we do have a lot of young women in the room, and we know that role models and mentors are really important to achieving more women in leadership roles. So do you want to talk about the importance of mentorship and any examples on your end?
Yeah, and I probably don't have to talk too much about the importance of mentorship. I think we probably all get that. I've had mentors in my life for sure, male and female. There's a woman that I have met relatively recently who every time, she's a senior executive with another midstream company, one much bigger than where I came from. And every time I spend time with her, I think, oh my God, why did I not meet her 10 years ago or whatever, like when I really needed her. But I still need her now, and she's 10 years older than I am, so she just has that much more life and professional experience that you really can't substitute. So she has such amazing stories, perspectives, insights. So how I thought I would approach this question, really, because I had lunch with her on Tuesday, which was very timely in advance of this panel. And she was telling me the story randomly of, and so I'm telling it to you because it resonated with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with you. And she was at a conference or some event that Madeleine Albright was speaking at. So like amazing that she had that opportunity. Madeleine Albright was the first female US Secretary of State under Bill Clinton's administration. And Dr. Albright shared that she was a story about when she was at the cabinet table with the other appointed Clinton secretaries. And whatever the discussion was about, she, in her mind, had an idea, but she did not share it because she thought, that's probably a stupid idea and they're gonna think I'm dumb. And she was the only female at the table. And sure enough, like 2 minutes later, one of her male colleagues says the exact same thing. And so I don't think Dr. Albright would have used these words exactly, but basically it was a TSN turning point for her, which is, oh my gosh, if you're thinking it, say it, and have way more confidence in yourself because your idea is probably a lot better than you think it is. You don't get to that table without having good ideas. And I also thought what was awesome about that story is even people like Madeleine Albright have those moments of, I'm not smart enough and I don't think I deserve to be at this table. So anyway, I just share that. It's not talking about the importance of mentorship, but it's a really cool story that I heard relevant to this panel. From my mentor.
Good to reinforce that, because sometimes we need to be reminded that it's normal to feel that imposter syndrome, and when you are aware of it and you can fight it within yourself because you hear stories like this, it can help you in whatever career pathways you're pursuing. I actually got the halfway mark, so we still have a lot of ground to cover. So, Amberly, at Pathways Alliance, you've seen firsthand some of the benefits of having women in leadership. Tell us about it.
So it's a very similar story, and so I apologize, and I hope you'll find it helpful. The Pathways Alliance, when it was stood up, I mentioned there's 6 major oil sands companies. That means there's 6 people that get to give their opinion. And so they formed up what's called the steering committee, and on that steering committee are sort of the chief sustainability officers from each of the respective organizations. They have different titles, but give or take. Half of them were women when it was established. It wasn't like Trudeau's panel or cabinet where he's like, half of my cabinet is female, and you're like, okay, cool. Did they earn it, or did you just give it to them because they had girl traits? So it was just an accident in this case. But there were half of the steering committee was female, and there's a really interesting story one of the SteerCo reps told me, and that's that they had to go to Ottawa a lot. They spent a lot of time in Ottawa, a lot of time in Alberta, up in Edmonton, talking about the Pathways Alliance, what they were hoping to do, what they were hoping to accomplish, and trying to build some support, because in order for our initiative to succeed, we need government support and government collaboration. And her point, similar to your example about having a female on the negotiating team, was that having that female representation in those conversations with government was different than what people had seen before. And instead of going in and having the usual kind of like posturing conversations, she felt that they were able to share information and build trust in a way that might not have been possible if it hadn't had sort of that representation of the female characteristics and leadership traits that were present at the table. And so at Pathways, the numbers will change in flux, but I think one of the fundamental pieces was standing up with that group of senior level women to help influence and move forward the direction of the Pathways Alliance. And then beyond that, I think one of the things, maybe less Pathways and more general, I'd like to mention or observe is just, we've kind of gone from the idea of particularly related to female diversity, but generally speaking, diversity and inclusion, as less of sort of like an add-on or like a thing we got to do at some point, and a bit more of just sort of how we recognize we should be doing business. I'm not going to say we're 100% of the way there, or even 30%, given the numbers that we shared, but I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're not talking about how, like, when should we do diversity and inclusion, but we're talking about like how should we do it. And so we are seeing a bit of a shift, and we're seeing some opportunities, but because I'm an engineer, I have to say it, we need more data, we need more information, we need to be able to make more graphs, and that'll help us to kind of make our case and progress as we look to have more diversity in our leadership and in our workforce in general.
Thank you. Naveen, this next one is for you. With your experience, what would you say today are the most pressing challenges that women face in leadership roles or the profession, and what are some steps that can be taken to address and overcome the challenges?
That's a great question, and I have a Madeleine Albright story.
You do?
I do.
Are you going to tell it?
I will. Because she also said, you know, there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
That's true.
I totally agree.
Right? And for several years, I worked at Georgetown University, and she was a professor there. So I had the great fortune of working with her. And I had this really cute Mini Cooper, and you're in DC, and you're like, you know, driving in a way that I would feel uncomfortable to drive now. But I remember I'm like, there's someone jaywalking across the street. So I like, you know, slam on my brakes and I lay on my horn, as one does, obnoxiously. And this person in the middle of the street like literally stopped and just faced me in the middle of the road as if to say, who the hell do you think you are? And it was Madeleine Albright. So I like roll down my window and I'm like, oh, hi. Just, you know, like I was honking to say hello, going like, oh, shit. And she just stood there for a moment. And then she just turned, and then she just kept walking. And I was like, I almost ran over Madeleine Albright. What was the question? Women supporting women?
Great question.
What are the challenges?
Special place in hell.
What are the challenges,
yes,
and what are the
challenges.
steps that can be taken to address the challenges?
Yes. Okay.
I was wondering.
Okay, so, you know, there's been this great movement and support of women and STEM and now STEAM, and we know the data around, you know, 50% of the entering the freshman class at the U of C engineering, they're women. They're graduating 50%. Women are starting the workforce 50%. You know, the stats reflect society. Yet there's this, you know, and I know I've got like two oil and gas people here, but like the pipeline, no pun intended, gets like smaller as you continue to climb that ladder or the jungle gym. And I think institutionally, our corporate structures have not been set up to embrace the diverse challenges that women and men face in this new era, whether you want to call it post-COVID or, you know, double income families, you know, latchkey kids, like whatever. Society has changed fundamentally in the last, you know, 3 generations, and the workforce really has not. You know, certainly maternity leave impacts women's career trajectories significantly. And I think that, you know, one of the greatest challenges is that we don't have opportunities that set up that support male or female families. And that's when women leave the workforce. And in Canada, it's really bad. And I say that actually, in my opinion, our maternity leave is one of the most discriminatory ways that we're keeping women out of the workforce. And here's why. Because we tell them, and I've had 2 kids in the States and a kid here, it was much easier in the US. Much easier. Because in Canada we say, leave the workforce for a year. Don't worry, go home, be with your kid. You don't hardly get anything on EI, but just be with your baby for the year. You cannot actually take EI and work part-time. You're not allowed. So how are you expected to maintain your professional kind of finger on the pulse with all of the technology that exists, all of this like myth of work-life balance, which are things that we should get out of our vernacular and talk about work-life integration, because you can't balance something that is inherently one thing. And then we say, oh no, you want to take 18 months? Sure, take more time off. How are we as a society supposed to welcome women back into the workforce when they've been gone for 18 months and not expect that to have an impact on their professional journey. And as women, we need to think about that too. And then a year later, if you want to have another kid and you go over it again. I was in a meeting earlier this week with someone we were talking about organizational design and structure, and they said, you know what, she just came back from maternity leave. Chances are she's going to have another baby. Don't promote her. Like, it wasn't directed at me. So, but these conversations exist every day. And if we aren't examining as a society the policies that we put in place to support women, then of course women are having a hard time re-entering the workforce. You've been out of it for the last 3 to 5 years. Whereas in the US, and they have a lot of challenges, but there were mothering rooms. It was come back when you can, because guess what? You got 5 weeks off, 3 of which were vacation. The other 2 was short-term disability. So, you're filling out paperwork that says, how did the condition begin? Was it work-related? Well, define work. What's the projected prognosis? You're like, a healthy baby? I don't know. But there was a much more, because there's a recognition that if we are going to support women on their professional journeys, that involves all aspects of your life.
Blair, you have something to say?
I do. I know. This is a perspective that I have never considered and never viewed it this way. And I actually have notes to respond to another question. So now when we get there, I won't say anything and then we can skip over some time. But it has to do with maternity leave. And the question was around just ways that, or an example of how I've helped to empower women in my organization, or whatever exactly the question was. And one of the examples I was going to use is when I was at Ferris, I was the only other female leader, and the other woman was just at a different stage of life than I was, and her kids were grown. And I had my second child when I was at Ferris, and so I went on my first maternity leave at Ferris, but no one had ever taken maternity leave there, so they had no idea what to do. And so for one, I helped figure out what the salary top-up should fairly look like. So I think I did well in that regard, that other women after me would have benefited from. But I thought, same thing, there's no way I'm taking a full year. Not a chance. Mm-hmm. I got to come back 6 months max. I cannot miss out on this time and these opportunities to grow. And then somebody said to me, you are doing such a disservice to the other women at Ferris, because now they are going to think the expectation is you have to come back after 6 months. Don't do it. That's not fair. And then somebody else said to me, and what a luxury it is that you get to take 12 months. At the time, 18 wasn't an option. What difference is another 6 months going to make, and why would you give up that time? Basically, he said, you're an idiot. He said, you're an idiot. But anyway, so here I am, all this time, thinking, that was a really good thing. I took 11 months, but this perspective that you shared, I don't know if I feel like it was hard for me to come back. Maybe it was, and there's opportunities I could have had that I didn't. I don't know, because I'll never know that. But anyway, I really appreciate that. That is, never thought of it that way.
But I wasn't going to get into it, but I went back to work less than 4 months after I had my child, and then shortly after I was promoted to chief forester. So you just don't know, and you're doing your best, and it never ends. And people are going to give you an opinion. I was told I wasn't doing the right thing, or I was doing even finding out the birth of the sex of your child. It's like everyone has an opinion if you're doing it or not. And I said I was going to find out, and someone in HR was like, "Well, it's the last secret of life. Why would you do this?" And I was like, "Okay, well, no matter what you do, someone has an opinion or it's criticized." But when you said that, Naveen, because I've never heard that opinion, and it's quite a bombshell to drop, because we think that Canadian maternity leave is so progressive. And I have found personally in dealing with people that have gone on mat leave and come back with me, I say, you have 12 months, but let me know. If you're bored, we can work something out. We can keep we can keep track of hours.
Yeah,
we can
off the books.
Yeah.
There's no mechanism in this country.
No, you have to find a way to track it. What do you think?
And I think I'm going to interject a third perspective to add to the convolution of the argument. But the other thing that we don't do well, and that the US does crappy at, is why can't dad stay home? Like, honest to goodness, if you have 12 months, each of you take 6. Boom, career progress, everybody's good. But if my husband was to have gone to his boss and say, hey, I'm gonna take 6 months off, take care of my kid, the guy would have laughed at him, right? Like, it's not that, we're not set up as a society in Canada and other places to allow the recognition that it doesn't have to be all on the female partner in the relationship. Case in point, the school called yesterday. I didn't answer my cell phone because I was in a meeting. So they called my work number just in case I wasn't answering my cell phone because And so I'm looking at this thinking, and they're like, well, if you don't call us back, we'll have to, I don't know what the kid needed to be picked up. And I'm thinking, did you call? It was the younger one, so second child.
He doesn't have a name yet.
And I'm thinking, did you call his dad? Because his number's also on the file. I know I wrote it down because I fill out the paperwork, but I knew it's on there. But for whatever reason, like, it doesn't even twig in the minds of our school system to call the dad when there's a problem with the child. Like, come on, there's 2 of us. Like, help me out here. So I think part of what I would like to add to the controversy is I think we need to do better at supporting men to make those decisions and have those opportunities and, take the time with the kids or let the female partner or the other partner, whatever the case may be, re-enter the workforce when they're ready. And then still have some of the recognition that daycare in this country is impossible to get when they're under 12 months old, and it costs you an arm and a bloody leg. So anyway, long story short, I think there's also the perspective of empowering the male partners or other partners in the relationship to help deal with some of the realities of having children in Canada or in the US.
I want to keep going.
But
I know. But this is why a women's panel is so fun, because you go in thinking, okay, these are the questions we're going to ask about mentorship, and someone throws a maternity curveball, and then we're going to get some true, authentic perspective that I think resonate with the audience, because I see your reactions. But I have to just point out, we are almost at time, and I think we will just continue to chat because we're a chatty panel. So I did want to give an opportunity, because we do have limited time and it is almost lunch. Did anyone in the audience want to ask a question to our panel? I see it. Yes. Whoa. Okay. Get ready, ladies.
Hi there. Thank you so much for actually talking about maternity leave and stuff. Like, that's great. And I had a question and a comment, kind of. And in the beginning, there was mention of statistics about women inclusion in the workforce. I remember in the 2016 Stats Canada, they also had they were talking about how the 20% of the total Canadian workforce is the immigrant workforce. So I was also curious if there might be a curiosity in collecting data just for, like, in the women workforce, like how many of those are immigrants from Canada. And my comment was also kind of related to that, but just talking about kind of a different barrier that some of the immigrant women have faced in the workforce in Canada. I think one of the things that I noticed is a lot of the job requirement, when the job postings are up there, they also talk about how you need to be a permanent resident. So when you have a temporary work permit or even a student permit who's looking for a summer job, or someone who's just graduated and they want to find something career-related in the environmental sector, I found it quite hard to apply for a lot of the jobs because a lot of them had that requirement to be a permanent resident. So I think that kind of sets us back to a different type of job in a different sector, and it kind of pushes us back to actually, progress in our career. So yeah, just wanted to add that comment. But yeah, thank you so much. Like, it's been very inspiring to hear you guys, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on the statistics? So, I'm sorry, engineer here. Can I comment on the numbers? It's interesting, and you've both, 2016 Stats Can data is available. They have newer data. With all the AI we've got going, I don't know why we can't get better access to the data that is available through Stats Can, but not to the public. Because heaven forbid Canadians know what the makeup of Canadian workforce looks like. So just if any of you are in government or happen to be in Ottawa, maybe mutter something about Stats Can data in public.
So we have I just have a question about, I know you guys all have very
different opinions on maternity leave. But if you were to go back in time before you had your first baby and you know what you know now, what would you do to navigate your maternity leave departure and reabsorption differently?
I'll kick it off while you're noodling it. I would just be nice. I would just be nicer to myself. Like, it's such a tough time. You put so much pressure on yourself. You want everything to be perfect. Like, I was having contractions while I was delivering safety training because I wanted to work as long as possible, and it was all about work and going back to work, and I just, like, we just need to take care of ourselves better. So I don't regret anything. It's just, I wish that I had just been kinder to myself and not put so much pressure all the time.
I sent a presentation in from the labor and delivery room shortly after I gave birth. Because I was supposed to present at 10 a.m. and so my boss had to do it for me, so I had to email him the presentation. Anyway, give yourself some time. It's a good point. And I think have confidence to advocate for yourself. Like, you guys both raised some good points about needing to advocate for yourself. When you go back to work, maybe no one else has had a baby in your organization before, or your boss hasn't had to deal with it yet. You need to tell people what you need and what will make it work for you, and you need to have the confidence to do that. And if they tell you that, you know, I hate to say it, at some point you may assert your perspective or your opinion, and they may tell you to get out, and maybe it's not the right place to work anymore. And the more that we can do that collectively, the better the situation will be for those that come behind us. And they need the flexibility. We need to recognize that not everyone's perspective is the same. And we need to have that flexibility, and you need to be able to articulate what works best for you and your family.
Yeah, and try to, I don't want to say don't feel guilty, but you will feel guilty for the rest of your life as a parent.
Like, no matter what?
Right, yeah, exactly. You're either not, you're doing something wrong. You're either not spending enough time with your kids or not spending, guilt is just a kind of a pervasive emotion throughout your whole life. But you make a decision that works for you, and you don't have to justify it to anyone.
We have another question.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
She'll go first.
Well, no, wait, do not volunteer me for that yet.
Hi, I'm Michelle Aris with Aris Landscape Design. So we're a women-owned and run business outside of Calgary, Alberta. And so we do a landscape design for sustainable design and riparian services and such. And so my question is, what has been your experience, and what suggestion would you offer for women in our case, we're in a male-dominated industry. I've been in this for 18 years, and there's been workshops I've gone to where I was the only woman there. So this is really nice. This is so nice. Yeah. But what would be your advice for women who are doing project management, and you're working with other men, and they will not respect nor adhere to you in that role? So a perfect example was we were running a project management on a design that we did for an individual, and he asked us to lead the project management and oversee the other workers. And there was a gentleman who was coming in to do some landscaping, and they were not showing up on time. They were showing up drunk, things like that. So when I brought up my concerns, I was actually met with verbal abuse from the owner, and there was no compromise. So what would be your best advice? Is there any classes to take for that, or what have you done in that situation? Would be my
tell us the
question.
secret.
Yeah,
Are you
tell me
looking
the
at
secret.
me? Well, that is such a good question, and probably a question that I personally should have expected would be asked, because.
Oh, sorry.
No. But I don't. I hope I have a good answer. I think partly all we can do is what's in our control. So for me personally, I don't think I've ever been in a situation just like that, but definitely situations where I can tell these guys are just looking at me like, who is this chick, and forget what she has to say. And my personal, what I do is I always show up like with my very best self. I am always one of the hardest workers in the room, no matter what. I constantly act with integrity. I'm positive, looking out for other people, genuinely interested in others, bring energy and enthusiasm to the room, do your homework, know what you're talking about, but that's the stuff that's in your control. So I try to do that as much as possible. Hopefully it works right away. Otherwise, hopefully over time it does, and you earn the respect of people who doubt you, whether they're women or men. Know your strengths and work to your strengths. And then in a situation like that where it just seems like you're dealing with a bunch of assholes, really, I just think, like, unless you're absolutely dependent on it, walk away, see you later, I don't need this, and there's a whole bunch of other people who will appreciate what I'm going to bring to the table.
That's some great advice. And unfortunately, we may not have a chance to get to all of the questions because I've already received the signal. But before you leave, one final thought from our panelists, and you can decide who wants to take this. As closing, your advice to the men in the room, your advice to the women in the room, and your advice to the young people in the room. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I think the biggest thing, and it actually even perhaps goes to the question around, what do? You need to have a team. And you don't need one team, you need like a whole bunch of teams. I've got a work team, I've got some great colleagues that do a lot of the work. I got a comms team that wrote a bunch of notes that I totally ignored, so don't tell them. I've got the home team, my husband and my kids, and they help with the chores and things like that. And I hope I'm not the only one, but I have like the girl group chat from university on WhatsApp where like if I need, it's like, does this look good on me today? And they, oh yeah, great, kill it. But you need all of those teams, and you need different groups, and you need, and the reason I think it ties into your question about, what do you do in that situation is you need allies as well. And so you need people that you can turn to and you can trust to tell you look like crap or to give you advice on what you should say in a presentation. You need those teams of people to help you, and you need to be part of those teams for other people. And so the more that we can do that, I think the better off we'll all be.
I love that.
I will give you some of the worst advice that I received because I think it's interesting. And that is the advice that we often tell people is do what you love. Find something that you love. And I enjoy what I do. It brings me joy. But reserve love for the people in your life and the experiences that having a great job that you like, that you enjoy, provides for you, because it's not a reciprocal relationship. And I think we set people with these unrealistic expectations about what their job and their profession and their team, that they're supposed to fulfill love in your life. Do what you love. That's very misguided. And so find something you enjoy and work hard and love the experiences and the people in your life that you get to spend time with.
You called me out because I said earlier, all I want to do is what I love doing with people I love doing.
Yeah.
You're the second person that I've heard that from, and I do. I do agree.
We hear it all the time. I don't love it. Really? There's a lot. I don't love I don't love my job. I enjoy it, but don't mistake love for what you get paid to do.
Different levels of love. Anyways,
that's another panel.
Yeah. I think I gave.
Next week.
I think I kind of gave my super high level advice just answering that last question. And one thing I will just leave you with, because I said to know what your strengths are, and then I just think personally leverage as much as possible your strengths and build on them, and then surround yourself with the people who may bring to the table what you're not so good at. And one of the best books, I think I love it, is called Strengths Finder. And the premise, I'll say this very quick, is all too often people are very familiar with what their weaknesses are, and they spend more time trying to improve on their weaknesses. But if you put the same amount of time into building on your strengths than you do on improving your weaknesses, you're already starting in a winning position, so you're going to get that much further. So this book, you read it, but the problem is people generally don't know what their strengths are, or don't focus on them, or don't know how to articulate them. Anyway, you go and do this online assessment, and it gives you a report of your top 5 strengths out of 41, and you can look at what your bottom one is too. And it's just really interesting because then you read and you're like, hey, yeah, this is what I'm really good at. And when you're talking to somebody or you're going for a job interview, it's just a little bit more about you, that here's what I know I can bring to the table that can complement. It's just a great book, and I always recommend it to everybody, Strengths Finder 2.0.
Well, that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for spending your hour with us. We clearly didn't cover all the ground we wanted to, so let's keep the conversation going. You're free to reach out to us. We're all on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you.